Yes.
Hi, everybody. I'm David D. I'm an alcoholic.
Hi, David.
And I'm just setting my stopwatch here. Some of you will probably laugh, but I'm dating myself. There was a time when it would have been very much against protocol to bring your phone up to the
Yeah.
to the podium, and now people don't even think that much about it, So I started drinking when I was 13. I grew up in West Seattle, not too far from Alki Beach. Those of you that are familiar with the area may recall the Homestead Restaurant down there, old log cabin restaurant. So we had one of the little cottage beach houses just away from the beach on that block there. So I went to Alki Elementary, Madison Junior High, West Seattle High School, and eventually to UW for school. But neither one of my parents were an alcoholic. We had other family issues, but alcoholism was not one of them. And so things were rolling along, pretty good until I was 13 years old, and then I got invited to a keg in Schmitz Park, and so I went up there and I had a beer, and I felt instantly better because perhaps, as some of you may recognize, even though life was pretty okay at that point, I felt like I had holes inside. I was never entirely comfortable. I had a lot of social anxiety. I wasn't quite sure of myself. Something wasn't quite right. And I took that drink and I felt instantly better. I felt more confident. I felt like this was the thing that I was missing, where I could now turn around and enjoy life. And so I had two.
Right?
If one is good, two is better. Three is better than two. Four better than three. And if you walk down the hill from that park, as you start to approach the school and the community center, there's a creek on the right. So they found me in that creek. Fortunately, it was summer and it was dry. But everyone else just had a few beers and went home. So that was a little bit of a sign of things to come. So as I went through junior high and high school, I started to drink more, started to add some marijuana to that combination. But it was Alki in the 70s. Like, I did not stick out that much, even though I often was the last one to leave the party, and often not of my own volition. But I managed to do pretty well in school despite the amount of drugs and alcohol that I was starting to consume. And so I tried to make sure that on the outside, everything was still, kosher. But it kept, as you all know, the disease is progressive, right? So I was trying to keep all the balls in the air, and eventually I couldn't do it anymore. I had... by the time that I got to college, my family was starting to get really worried. And then by the time I was in graduate school, I was doing drugs and alcohol. At that point, I had added cocaine to the alcohol and marijuana mix, and it was downhill in a hurry. And I was doing some really crazy stuff to continue to try to keep all the balls in the air, and it wasn't good. Started doing some illegal activities to kind of, pay for all the stuff that I was doing. And eventually, I dropped out of school, got fired from my job, and eventually I wasn't doing anything except drinking and drugging every day and doing whatever kind of activities I needed to do to support that. Um, and so my family eventually did an intervention. And so they came to find me in the drug house, and I was sitting on a table like this, and I had drugs and alcohol on the table. So my younger sister was there. She had always looked up to me. My mom, my dad, everybody's crying, and they're saying that they think I'm going to kill myself. And I asked if I could finish the drugs and alcohol before I went with them to the treatment center. I mean, I said that serious as I'm talking to you now, just to illustrate the insanity of the disease, right? I mean, that's how insane I was. I was blessed enough as an alcoholic to have, these people in my life that I cared about, and I was quite willing to throw that all away, and had been throwing that all away just so I could drink and drug more, you know. Um, and they said, no, you may not finish the drug and alcohol. So off I went to the old Ballard Care Unit. That's somebody up at Swedish Hospital up here. And so we sat in the cafeteria of the Ballard Care Unit at 5 a.m. until a bed opened up. And I went up there, and it took a while to sober me up. So, but when I kind of woke up, you might say, and I had on the striped green pajamas and stuff like that. And so one of the first things on the schedule that morning at the treatment center was a meeting, and it wasn't an outside meeting like we bring in. I'm going to get to that in a minute. It was just kind of an internal meeting that the counselors were facilitating. And so I listened to the meeting for about 5 minutes, and then I stood up and I told everybody what was, how they should do things differently.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, my brain is still toxic, right? But that's where the ego was. That's where the arrogance was. That's where the lack of self-awareness was. That I actually thought that message would come off well. I was surprised that it didn't. So they told me to have a seat. They said, "Sit down, Dave, and when your brain detoxifies, we'll call on you." And so that was kind of my first. I started to get these little doses of kind of forced humility, if you will, because I wasn't coming to the table with any of that naturally. I wasn't a mean drunk, but I was a very, very unaware drunk. And there was no ability to read the room at all, And then I also, when I was at the treatment center for maybe a couple of days, people like you guys brought a meeting into that treatment center, and somebody said, and it wasn't somebody that I had much in common with, I thought, but it was, somebody said, if you're willing to follow a few simple suggestions, you have a chance to not drink one day at a time. And that was the first time in my life that I had really considered the fact that maybe the secret to not drinking was to just try not to drink at this very moment. Because I had tried so many times. I got up in the morning, promised myself I wasn't going to drink and drug, and minutes later I had failed. And I did that over and over and over again, and I didn't know how to do it. But one of the first times in my life, I actually listened. What that person said actually hit home in my very toxic and ego-driven mind. And so, I stayed for the 21 days of treatment, And then they had meetings. Perhaps some of you that have been around for a while have been to them. They would have meetings in the basement of the care unit on the first floor there on Saturday and Sunday mornings. They'd have meetings at the care unit, and I would go, and people from outside the treatment center, like you guys, would come in and they would share their stories and stuff like that, you know. And I started to figure out that this one day at a time thing a little bit, you know, because part of what happens when you go to treatment is you go to an aftercare, you know, program or whatever, right? So you go to aftercare. There was 12 people that kind of graduated. I love that term, right? Graduated from a treatment center, and then the next week there was 10, right? And the next week there was 8. And by the time the 12 weeks of aftercare were up, it was like me and one other person, you know. And it started to really dawn on me how dangerous this disease is, you know. And I was fortunate enough to get referred to some recovery houses. And so I went right from the treatment center to the recovery house. And so I was around like 7 other guys all day, every day, you know, for my first year of sobriety. We went to meetings and we hung out together. We did that whole thing. So kind of to some of the points that Neil was making earlier, I was embraced in the fellowship, you know, so I was very, very fortunate that way. I'm not sure I would have been you know, I don't know that I would have been blessed with the gift of sobriety if I was doing it all on my own, you know. And one of the things they had me do was, as the new person, you shared a room, right? So they decided that it would be good for me to share the room, and obviously I'll leave the person's name out of it. But I shared the room with this big, huge guy, and he was deaf, and he was in the vocational rehab program at Boeing and stuff like that. So he would have to wake up in the morning, catch the first available bus, go down there to Boeing. But he was deaf, right? So keep it this before cell phones and stuff like that now, right? So my job was to wake him up, right? So I'd have to wake up and literally kind of pound on this guy's chest, right? And then he would wake up and he would be mad, and then he would go off to his thing, you know. So that was my first service opportunity, was waking this guy up, you know. And but what I didn't realize was that the other guys realized is that I got up, right? I got up to wake him up, right? So I got up, I did my spiritual routine. I went to my morning book study, all that stuff, because I woke him up, you know, instead of me sleeping in or whatever, you know. They also told me that it wasn't going to be okay to like just do school. I was halfway through my graduate program. They said you get a job, and so I went off and did some construction stuff with most of the guys in the house were in construction at the time. So I went off and did some construction, and we hung out together, you know. And the guy that was my sponsor, I feel like I owe him my life. He went everywhere with me. And I'm going to jump ahead to that for a minute because he went everywhere with me. We went all through the steps. And then at about 3 years, he stopped going to meetings. You know, and I'm not sure what became of him. I don't know that he went back out. I just know he stopped going to meetings and I didn't see him anymore. This was after we left the house. So that was a little bit of a lesson. Some of the guys in the house didn't make it. One of the guys asked me to go for a ride with him. We went for a ride. And when we got in the car, he said he wanted to go back out. So I got out of the car on 4th Avenue downtown, and he didn't come back. He started drinking, and then he ended up overdosing. that night, so he didn't come back. So I had some very early lessons of how serious this disease is, and how quickly you can come and go in this program and stuff like that. Um, at the same time that I was going through the men's house, uh, there was a woman going through the women's side of those houses. So each of us lived in those houses for a year, and then each of us managed one of those houses for a year, and then we moved out together, and then the next year we got married, and this year we celebrated 31 years
Good.
together that we've both been sober, through the same set of recovery houses. The My wife went through a time where she got very, very sick, and eventually she couldn't remember what day it was. She's a chemical dependency counselor for adolescent boys, and at one point she was chemical dependency counselor of the year for the state of Washington for adolescent boys. But she got to the point where she couldn't remember what day it was. And so I said, honey, you got to go get an MRI. And you can't, it's hard to just request an MRI. But she can, finally, she's got an MRI, and they said, well, you have a tumor the size of an orange in the back of your brain, and it needs to come out right away. You and your husband need to sign a will, no trip to Disneyland with the kids, because we need to get this out right away. That was 12 years ago. And so at that time, she had lost her job, and I had lost half of my job. I got laid off from half of my job. I was working for a company that was based out of New York, and they were just pulling out of Seattle, to make a long story short. So we lost 3/4 of our income in a very short period, had to sell our home that we were at. And then we had all these medical bills. 19 hours of brain surgery. And every 2 hours I would get a call. I'm in the chapel at Swedish up here on the hill. Every 2 hours I would get a call saying whether she was going to make it or not. 19 hours of brain surgery. The woman that performed the surgery was in her late 30s. 19 hours, no mistakes. She lived. Miracle. But the reason that I brought that up is the home group wrapped themselves around me during that difficult time. I did not have to get through that time of myself. We all have faced difficult times in our sobriety, whether we've been here for just a little bit or for many, many years. We all go through ups and downs. And they told me that I didn't need to do this by myself. They told me this is a we program and not a me program. So when I go through a difficult time, they told me that the secret was to immediately reach out, not to pretend like I can manage that on my own. Because alcoholism is cunning, baffling, and powerful, and we have the combined mental obsession with the physical allergy. As soon as I have that thought, this is, going back to some of the guys in the recovery houses and the guys in the aftercare program. As soon as I have that thought that I might like a drink, I am then immediately defenseless. If I try to fight that battle by myself, I will lose. That's the concept I absolutely need to understand in order to stay sober. And so whether it's a brain surgery or a divorce or a suicide attempt or the loss of a job, or the very, very difficult family histories that many of us have been through, whatever that is, we have a chance to manage those issues. I have a chance to manage those issues if I reach out for help, if I call my sponsor, if I work the steps, if I depend on my fellows in the program. I have a shot, right? If I don't reach out, now I'm playing with the deadly disease. And so I was very fortunate to be able to learn that concept relatively early in my sobriety, and that has helped me out a lot. I don't sit on my stuff. I will call somebody, and there's people in this room that have been there for me in that respect. Um, one of the other, how am I doing on time here? One of the other things that I want to talk about is my home group, Empire Way. You see that I'm, maybe more dressed than the occasion would call for. But there's people in that meeting. Some of them have been sober long enough that they've actually worked with Bill W. So very, very lucky to be part of a home group where there's actually people still in the meeting that can tell you what it was like to work with Bill W. at the General Service Conference in 1967. Like, it's crazy to even be able to have a conversation like that with somebody. And what they told me was, when you get asked to speak, not necessarily when you go to every meeting, when you get asked to speak, and you're representing your home group. And so dress up a little bit, because not to show that you're important, but just to show that you care enough about representing your home group that it matters enough to you to think about, what you put on and stuff like that. It's not a showing off thing. It's an honoring the home group and AA kind of thing. And I'm not saying whether that's right, wrong, or indifferent. I'm just kind of sharing that that's kind of an Empire Way tradition and stuff like that. And so when I got to Empire Way, I had 3 years of sobriety. I had been going to a lot of meetings all over town. I didn't really have a home group. And so I got to Empire Way 3 years of sobriety. And I'm as many of you probably know, if you've been fortunate enough to be sober for 3 years, you start to 3 to 5 years, you start to think maybe you've got it figured out a little bit, maybe I can kind of drive the car, and maybe I know a little more than some of the other people do and stuff like that. And a very dangerous place sometimes between 3 and 5 years. And that's where I was. And I saw this guy, still very much in my head, right? I saw this guy running around the room, setting up tables, setting up chairs, smiling, shaking people's hands. I'm like, who is this guy? Like, because while I had been blessed with my life with some good fortune, you might say, that I didn't know how to just be happy to be happy. That was not something I came to this program with the knowledge of how to do. I thought you had to achieve something and then you were happy, or something wonderful happened to you and then you were happy. I didn't think you could be happy just because you woke up. This guy was clearly happy for nothing. And so I asked him to be my sponsor. And because I picked somebody not that was exactly like me, I picked somebody that was different than me, which doesn't, I'm not making it pick whoever you want to pick, but I thought it would be good for me to pick somebody that was different than me, that someone that had different attributes. I knew how to do David. I needed how to do something different than that. His name is Vito. Many of you probably know him, and he's been sober for 40 something years now. And he's 90 and finds it difficult to go to as many meetings as he would like to now, but I still talk to him very often. And what I learned from him is to keep it very, very simple. This program is not an intellectual contest. Yeah. It is a contest of action and willingness and open-mindedness and honesty. And I learned that from him. And he still to this day wakes up and says, tells himself that he loves everybody and it calls at least one person a day at 90 years old. And so I really owe a lot to my sponsor, Vito. And he's also been a great example of service. He's very passionate about service for Intergroup and was down here answering the phones every Thursday with a guy named Marvin that passed away some years back. But the two of them would come to answer the phones, and that was just watching them answer the phones was worth the price of admission. Mm-hmm. And so I've been fortunate, you guys, to be able to learn from, people that set those kinds of examples and stuff like that. And then there's Ralph, who's, I'm just going to read this. I'm just going to read this one thing. This is a big book that Ralph gave me. on my birthday in 2002. When I read this, please read it that I'm not reading it as a credit to myself. I'm reading it as a credit to the program. I've been blessed with some wonderful things with, if I have enough time, I'll share a few minutes about. None of that was on account of David. All of that was on account of AA and the people like you. He says, I thank you for your devotion to our fellowship and your great service for all of us, your friend Ralph. And Ralph is having some health challenges right now. And so I just wanted to read that because he's been a really good example to me of, I think Ralph has 67 years, 68, 66 years of sobriety, and up until very recently, he was still coming every single Wednesday
Driving
to the
himself
home.
to the meetings.
Yeah. So, I've been very fortunate to know some of those people. And I have, as I said, my wife and I have been married for the past 31 years. We have 2 kids. One of them just graduated from high school. The other one's 25. He's working in San Francisco. Neither one of those kids because of this program, has ever seen me drink. And when my daughter was in middle school, the assignment for the day was to write an essay about who's your hero. So kids were writing about like Beyonce or Michael Jordan, right? She said, she wrote an essay that her dad was her hero. The same dad that almost killed himself with drugs and alcohol. That same dad that was only here because of you guys now gets to have moments like that. There's people in this room that have helped my son get his first job. I can't put into words the level of gratitude that I have for this program, and it's a joy to be able to give back, to be on a service committee, or to be the secretary for my home group. It may not surprise you, haven't heard me for a few minutes, that I, like to chair inventories and stuff like that. So, I'm happy to give back in whatever way that I can, because it's the gift of sobriety. They told me early on that it's a gift. We say it all the time, but if you think about what is it, why do they call it a gift? Well, it's a gift because I have to, in order to enjoy the giving, I have to give to someone else. I don't enjoy it by just keeping it to myself. I enjoy it by giving it to other people, and then that helps me keep the gift as well at the same time. And so everybody in this room, I know, does their share of service, and I'm grateful to you all for it. And I think I would just close with this, that the unity of the fellowship for me has been a key, because one of my favorite sayings was from a woman that was a longtime member of Empire Way. Her name was Pat O. And her favorite saying was, "I'm lonely in a crowd." And I could really relate to that, because I could put on the exterior front. I could front, but inside there was nothing. And she said I was lonely in a crowd, and that really rang true for me. And so I needed to belong to something. And it doesn't matter what background anybody's from. We all have the disease of alcoholism in common. And so the opportunity to recover from that on a daily basis is a gift, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to share some of that today.
Good.
Thank you.